Henry VIII. He's one of the most famous kings in history.
His story is so bombastic. I mean, what other monarch has 6 queens and beheads 2 of them?
It was unprecedented. It was seen as bizarre, even crazy, that the king had 6 wives back in the 16th century, and today it still holds our interest.
Larger than life, both in power and in presence.
There was no dynasty like the Tudor dynasty for drama.
There is something unthinkable, almost imaginable about Henry VIII's story, and I think that's why we are obsessed with it.
A warrior, a lover, a man who changed the course of England forever.
I think we're all still so obsessed with the Tudors because of how unrealistic it all is. If this had been the work of fiction, we would think it was pushing credulity.
But who was the real Henry VIII? A great ruler, a ruthless tyrant, or simply a man obsessed with control?
I mean, this is a family who killed one another.
For 1509, Henry VIII is not the feared, tyrannical figure of later years. He is the hope of England, the golden king of a golden age. But history has a way of turning even the brightest dreams into shadows. And for Henry, the seeds of change have already been sown.
But ultimately, I think Henry only had room to love one person, and that was himself.
The year is 1509. England stands at a threshold of change. A young, vibrant king, just 17 years old, ascends the throne. He is Henry Tudor, soon to be remembered as Henry VIII. History will paint him as a tyrant, a man of many wives, but in his early reign, Henry is something else entirely. A golden prince, the very embodiment of Renaissance ideals.
Henry VIII, the second Tudor monarch, was born in 1491. He is the second son of Henry VII and Elizabeth of York. So he is declared Duke of York as a child, and he's always intended to be a great nobleman, but of course isn't raised to become king.
He was the spare to the heir Arthur, so he was never supposed to succeed to the throne.
When his brother dies, everything changes for Henry. He's declared Prince of Wales, and he now becomes the sole focus of his father's ambitions and his father's efforts, because his father has no brothers. He has no other surviving sons. So Henry VIII is the future of the Tudor dynasty.
Unlike his father, the cautious and pragmatic Henry VII, young Henry is bold, charismatic, and hungry for glory. With his striking red gold hair and imposing frame, he is the very image of a warrior king.
Henry VIII can best be described as a young man as a golden prince. He was very much conversant in the language of courtly love. He enjoyed singing, dancing, composing music, and also playing instruments. But he was also very athletic. He enjoyed riding, hunting, and taking part in combat sports such as the joust royal and also wrestling. But Henry also had a brilliant mind. He was a studious and devout scholar of theology and had a very devout faith. So Henry was a bit of an all-rounder. As a young child, Henry was rather precocious. He was very well educated, but also had a reputation for being quite cheeky. He did have a fondness for religion, but also for athleticism. He was known for his abilities on the tilt yard and also at things like wrestling. So Henry really was a golden child. He very much enjoyed the studious side of life, but also the more fun elements of it too.
Henry VIII was deeply human. But kingship is not just about sport and song. It is about power, about diplomacy. He dreams of a chivalric England, a kingdom that rivals the great courts of Europe. With a gleam in his eye and a thirst for conquest, he leads England into war with France. The Battle of the Spurs is a triumph, Henry's first taste of military victory. England and France had been enemies for centuries, and Henry VIII was determined to prove himself against his powerful neighbour. Henry also fought Scotland, England's northern rival. Henry VIII loved war. But there was one battle he never truly won, the battle for a male heir. His obsession with securing the Tudor dynasty shaped not only his marriages, but the very course of English history. By the time Henry returned from his wars in France and Scotland, he had already seen firsthand that power was fragile. Kings could die in battle, as Scotland's James IV did at Flodden. Without a strong male heir, his own kingdom could fall into chaos. Henry married Catherine of Aragon in 1509, right after becoming king.
Catherine of Aragon was raised her whole life to be queen. She is a Spanish princess and both her parents are monarchs. Her mother is Isabella of Castile and her father is Ferdinand, King of Aragon. So she is incredibly royal. She was betrothed to Prince Arthur in her infancy and was prepared for her future in England. When she marries Henry VIII, after several years of waiting, she must have felt that all her prayers have been answered. He is incredibly good looking and undoubtedly Catherine fell deeply in love with Henry. And he seems to have believed himself to be in love with her. She was young, she was attractive, she had sort of golden reddish hair. She was also very, very highborn and knew exactly how to behave as queen. Catherine rarely puts a foot wrong as queen consort. She acts as regent of England when Henry goes to France, for example. She manages her household. She takes part in court entertainments, and she also really sort of humours Henry. He loved dressing up, and he would often appear in disguise in her rooms, and she would always pretend not to know who he was. On one occasion, for example, he appears dressed as Robin Hood, accompanied by his merry men, bursts into the Queen's chambers, and she dances with him, and then feigns surprise when she realises that it's Henry who is there.
Whilst Henry was away on a campaign in France, he actually appointed Catherine of Aragon as his regent, so she was ruling the kingdom in his stead. But James IV of Scotland took this opportunity to invade England. He obviously saw that Catherine acting as a regent was an opportune time to invade and take advantage of the king's absence. Now, many a queen would have simply fled to the Tower of London and allowed her nobles to take care of the invading army on her behalf. But instead, Catherine ordered that the Tower of London was emptied of all its armoury and armour, and she accompanied the troops, even though she was the troops to bolster support for England. And it was at the bloody Battle of Flodden that James IV of Scotland was slain and Catherine of Aragon was triumphant on this occasion. She actually sent Henry a piece of James IV's surcoat, which was bloodied up, so that Henry could wear it on a banner during his campaign in France. Indeed, in a letter to Henry, she actually confesses that she wanted to send James's body to Henry as a trophy, but she conceded that the English nobles would not stomach it.
The couple have several children. Catherine falls pregnant soon after her marriage, but unfortunately, only one daughter, Mary, who's born in 1516, survives. Catherine gives birth to probably 3 sons, but only one survives birth, only to die after a few weeks. Mary is her only surviving child, and while for Catherine, as the daughter of a female sovereign, the idea of a reigning queen is not so alien.
His queen is his partner in every sense, intelligent, graceful, and politically astute. Their early years are filled with warmth, mutual admiration, and a shared desire to secure the Tudor legacy. Then, in 1525, Henry met Anne Boleyn, and everything changed.
It's clear that Henry was deeply in love with Anne. We can see it in his love letters. We can see it in his conduct, the fact that he was prepared to break England away from the Pope and to annul a marriage to the aunt of the Holy Roman Emperor, who's the most powerful man in Europe. There is no doubt that Henry adored Anne. He loved her deeply. In his letters, he talks about being struck by the dart of love. But he also talks about wanting her on a physical level. He talks about wanting to caress her pretty duckies, which is slang for breasts. So he clearly loves her both on a physical level and as a person. It's less easy to see what Anne's opinion of Henry is. We are still looking at the Henry VIII, who is young and good looking. He's in his 30s. He's still in his prime. He's only starting to gain weight. He's still a real catch. So it's easy to see how Anne could fall in love with a man like Henry VIII. And the indications are that they are close, but it is harder to see her point of view. Certainly she has the upper hand and she is more dominant. And we know there are occasions at court where they argue. For example, once she says that she's wasted her youth on him and threatens to leave him before he bursts into tears. So she is definitely the dominant party before they marry. But there is no doubt, at least on Henry's part, that it is true and deep love, and almost certainly the deepest love that he felt throughout his lifetime.
Madly in love with Anne, Henry sought to annul his marriage to Catherine.
The only real way that Henry was going to be able to marry Anne was if the Pope would annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. And Anne and Henry knew that the best mechanism for achieving that end would be through the king's minister, Thomas Wolsey.
Henry wanted to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon on the basis that she had been his brother's wife. So they're related to within the first degree of affinity. They are, as far as the church is concerned, brother and sister. And his argument is that you cannot dispense such a marriage. And such a marriage cannot be permitted. It is against church law.
But the Pope refused to grant the annulment, placing Henry in a difficult position. Determined to have his way, he defied the authority of Rome, breaking from the Catholic Church and establishing the Church of England. This bold move not only secured his marriage to Anne Boleyn, but also reshaped the religious and political landscape of England forever. However, his passion for Anne soon faded. When she failed to provide the longed-for male heir, Henry's frustration grew. Accusations of treason and infidelity sealed Anne's fate. She was arrested, tried, and executed in 1536. Undeterred, Henry moved on to his next wife, Jane Seymour, who finally gave him the son he so desperately wanted. But his quest for love and legacy was far from over, leading him through 3 more marriages, each marked by intrigue, heartbreak, and political maneuvering. Of Henry VIII's 6 wives, 2 were divorced, 2 were executed, 1 tragically died, and 1 was left a widow. By the time Henry VIII reached his mid-40s, he was no longer the charming, athletic king he had once been. His later years were marked by declining health, increasing paranoia, and ruthless political decisions. The Golden Prince of England had become a tyrannical, overweight, and deeply troubled ruler. As Henry's body deteriorated, so did his mind. His paranoia grew, and he trusted no one, not his advisors, not his wives, not even his closest friends. Thomas Cromwell was Henry VIII's most loyal and brilliant minister, engineering the king's break with Rome, the dissolution of the monasteries, and even Henry's marriage to Anne Boleyn. But in the end, Cromwell's own success became his downfall. The biggest mistake? Arranging Henry's ill-fated marriage to Anne of Cleves in 1540.
The architect of the marriage to Cleves was, of course, Thomas Cromwell, and having loyally served Henry throughout his career, Henry now believed that Thomas Cromwell had created this marriage for his own interests and not those of the king.
Henry found her unattractive and was furious at being tricked into the match. Though Cromwell smoothed over the annulment, his enemies, especially the Duke of Norfolk, used the failure to turn Henry against him. Once the king's trust wavered, it was only a matter of time. Cromwell was arrested, charged with treason, and executed that same year.
Having served Henry loyally for many years, Thomas Cromwell was now seen by the king as the architect of this incredibly awkward marriage between Anne of Cleves and himself. And he really blamed Cromwell. This was the beginning of the end of Cromwell's prominence at court.
By the 1540s, Henry was a shadow of his former self. His 6th wife, Catherine Parr, became more of a caretaker than a queen. His children, Edward VI, Mary I, and Elizabeth I would each take their turn as England's monarch.
It's very difficult to state whether Henry VIII truly loved any of his wives. I think he respected many of them. I think he was besotted with most of them, and he was obsessed, certainly, by Anne Boleyn. But ultimately, I think Henry only had room to love one person, and that was himself.
Henry wanted a son to secure his legacy, but in the end, it was his daughter who left the greatest mark on history, Elizabeth I.
Henry VIII had been ill on and off for the latter part of 1546. And just before Christmas, he leaves the Queen and his daughter Mary and goes to Westminster. And it's clear very quickly that he's dying. He spends his last few weeks cloistered away with his council, and particularly his secretary, William Paget, who is very close to Edward Seymour, Henry's brother-in-law, the brother of Queen Jane, and the uncle of the heir to the throne. During this period, Henry asks that a new will is drawn up. He'd previously made a will in the early days of his marriage to Catherine Parr, and he seems to have named her as regent in the event of his death. But this new will completely overturned that. Instead of naming anyone as regent, Henry in fact established a council of equal ranking executors. So all of these men have an equal role to play, and it was hoped that they would guide Edward through his minority and into his adult reign. There's quite a lot of question marks over the validity of Henry's will, and it may have been signed with a stamp of his signature rather than his signature itself, which would make it invalid. However, it's clear that it was drawn up on his wishes, and certainly it doesn't really benefit anyone. Anyone who might have wanted to forge the will, actually it really wouldn't have done them any favours, particularly Edward Seymour, who was clearly hoping for the regency. In his final days, really only William Paget and Edward Seymour have access to the king. When he dies, they keep the death secret to the extent that food is still brought to his chamber. And this is to give Edward Seymour time to ride to Hertford to go and acquire his nephew, the new king, and he brings him to London. Paget has the will, and together they are able to secure the appointment of Edward Seymour as Lord Protector. So he becomes regent to Edward VI. So they override Henry VIII's wishes.
After years of ill health, Henry VIII finally dies in 1547, leaving the throne to his son, Edward, who was only 9 years old. Henry was acutely aware of the difficulties of child rulers, and he appointed a regency council for Edward, and Edward then appointed a Lord Protector, his uncle Edward Seymour.
He had everything: power, wealth, wives, and the loyalty of a nation. But in the end, Henry VIII died a sick, paranoid, and broken man. He changed England forever, splitting from Rome, destroying monasteries, creating a new church in his own image. But at what cost? He left behind a country drowning in debt, divided by religion, and scarred by the blood he spilled.
Henry VIII was buried at Windsor, and he chose to be buried with his third queen, Jane Seymour. Much is made of this choice in burial. We know that Henry was very fond of Jane, that he loved her, and that he liked to insert her into posthumous portraits of his family. However, Henry had no other choice but to be buried with Jane. He had annulled his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, he had beheaded Anne Boleyn, Anne of Cleves was still alive, he had beheaded Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr was also still alive, so he had no choice but to be buried with Jane.
Henry VIII, tyrant, visionary, legend.
This is a family who had a king with 6 queens, who killed 2 of them. This is a family with feuding siblings. It has everything for us to enjoy, and we can't get enough of it.
His story still echoes through time, reminding us that power, once gained, is never easily given up.
The Tudor dynasty was defined by a change in religion, a consolidation of power, and also the ability to look outwards and both inwards. This is an era defined by great cultural advances in the arts, but also as an age of exploration and empire. The Tudors really are central to our sense of national identity. I think Henry VIII occupies a huge amount of attention, not only because he broke with the church in Rome and established his own church in England. Not only did he begin the reform of Parliament and also the establishment of the Navy, but his story is so bombastic. I mean, what other monarch has 6 queens and beheads 2 of them? There is something unthinkable, almost imaginable about Henry VIII's story, and I think that's why we are obsessed with it.